The Great Southern Trendkill, a self-referential title to what I consider to be Pantera's masterpiece. Yes, I listen to it more and rate it higher than Cowboys and Vulgar Display of Power. Always have. That's not to say those aren't great albums, but Pantera hit the bullseye with this one. To explain my case, I'll set the scene. Pantera started their career as a glam metal band. Phil Anselmo debuted as their vocalist on the power metal album. This was when things started to get heavier. But it was only on the next album, Cowboys from Hell, where they ditched the hairspray and distanced themselves from anything glam. This was their first major label album, being largely influenced by the New Orleans groove metal band, Exorder. It hit the metal scene like a lightning bolt, and Pantera were quickly working their way up in the world. Vulgar Display of Power was the second album. It was shorter, musically tighter, heavier, had harsher vocals, and further showcased Dimebag's abilities as a guitar player. This album made Pantera a household name, with songs like Walk, Fucking Hostile, Hollow, and This Love. Negating the stigma that metal bands often soften after releasing groundbreaking and heavy albums, Far Beyond Driven came out in 1994. This album's MO was to destroy everything in sight. Pantera were keeping up with current metal records to see how heavy things were, and then aimed to beat them all to death. Everything on Far Beyond Driven sounds hard. The drum tones, the bass sounds, the vocals. Sonically, it's the heaviest album they ever released. In fact, the brutality of it turned off some fans that preferred the more accessible and melodic approach of the previous two albums. There was more screaming, more growling, and the lyrics were more of a macho nature. You know, lyrics for tough guy teenagers who just wanted to beat someone up. Each album progressively featured more of these lyrics. The trajectory of their sound, even from the glam metal days, was that they got musically heavier over time. Far Beyond Driven was an apt title, but everything would be driven even harder on the Great Southern Trendkill. As soon as you hit play, the album throws you right into the war zone. There's a scream, and everyone plays fast and hard. Let's compare this to the first few albums. Cowboys started off like a Pantera asteroid crash landed. You got the sound effect, then Dime plays the riff, and the riff gets louder on the final notes, and the band crashes in. It's a feeling of, we are Pantera, we have arrived. Vulgar opens with Mouth for War. Already the whole band is playing the intro. So this time it feels like, you know we're here, and you know what's coming. Get ready for it. Strength Beyond Strength opens Far Beyond Driven. No intros this time. Dime leads it off, and then Phil and everyone blasts in. It's a feeling of, wake up asshole, there's a mosh pit. This time with the title track, there's no it's just... There's more screaming and growling on this album than the other albums. Some of these growls are low and subtle in ways that you wouldn't notice unless it was pointed out. Intensity was the goal with this album, and to lend to the intensity was edgelord Seth Putnam, who screamed on a few tracks. Lyrically, it discusses the mission of the album, to go heavier musically than ever. In the mid to late 1990s, Metallica released Load and Reload. Slayer put out Diabolus and Musica. Megadeth spit out Cryptic Writings. Anthrax did something with Stomp 442, and those bands were metal giants. Meanwhile, thrash metal was pretty much dead, death metal was declining in popularity, and nu metal was becoming a thing. Pantera didn't want to water down anything. They wanted to go harder and harder, flying the flag for extreme metal at a time when it seemed like the genre was playing itself out. Naturally, there are more I am very badass and I'm stomping around type of lyrics. As a result, the album has a big fuck you energy. However, the lyrics are also darker and more personal. This reflects the rift happening with the band at the time. Phil was becoming distant from his bandmates on account of heroin addiction, so songs like Tens reflect some of those experiences. Phil's distance from his bandmates meant that he tracked vocals in New Orleans, separate from Dime, Vinny, and Rex, who recorded the music together. Some people view this as a drawback of the album, citing a lack of chemistry. I disagree. The vocals for an album are often tracked after the instruments have already been recorded. That's regardless of whether the whole band works in the same studio. Most of the time, the vocalist isn't even in the studio when the drummer's tracking because, frankly, the producer doesn't want a lot of distractions or precious space being taken up. Even for guitar players who sing, they track their vocals after they've tracked guitars. Bands who play live off the floor together also work this way. As far as using different studios, many major albums have been recorded in several studios. This is often for budget reasons, or because one studio may have better gear or a better drum room. so the drummer can track in one studio while the rest of the band tracks elsewhere afterwards. And when you have a band where all the members live in different places, it's not uncommon that they might want to record closer to home. I never held that against Trendkill, and neither should you. Pantera fans seem to point it out because this was when tensions between members were beginning to tear the band apart. But in the end, I feel like it helped create a more extreme album. Actually, the vocal layering seems more labored on this album than any of the other albums. There are multiple screams going on at once, whispered vocals happening before main vocals like on Floods, double-tracked vocals like on Tens. Strange vocal effects and demonic vocals are part of the album's sound. What I'm saying is that more time was spent on the vocal production, and it shows. So, you have the crazy breakdowns like in the title track. Dime let his southern rock influences shine on the solo for that one. Very Skinnerd. War Nerve is concentrated anger in musical form, and then Drag the Waters comes in. This was the only song from the album that got a music video. It's also the only song that appeared on their Greatest Hits album. Some may look at it as, well, there was only one hit from the album, so the rest of the album didn't have a lot going on for it. The thing is, Pantera were never a hits band. They sold a lot of albums despite not getting much radio play. Those albums succeeded on the strength of MTV, opening for the right bands, and doubling down on their heaviness. Their fanbase was so dedicated that Far Beyond Driven made it to number 1 on the Billboard 200 charts. It was confusing to a lot of people that this happened, but the album came out at the right time with the right circumstances. Pantera was an album band, even if they were criticized for the length of Cowboys, or if people said that Far Beyond Driven was front-loaded in the first half. If anyone wants hits, Vulgar Display of Power may be more their speed. What we have here is an album full of deeper songs without feeling the need to play things safely. Back to Drag the Waters. The band explained that this song was about trying to get to the bottom of why people do horrible things. Some people are just evil for unexplained reasons. The lyrics on this album stay in dark territory, such as on the 2-part Suicide Note. Part 1 is the quieter acoustic ballad with a more depressing and lonely aura. Part 2 is the louder, harsher, and more violent blast of sound, going with a more abrupt cause of death. Acoustic guitars have been on Pantera songs in the past, but on Suicide Note Part 1, there's a 12-string Washburn being played. This adds to the creepiness of the subject matter, all while backward guitar effects are going on. Far Beyond Driven and this album used more down-tuned guitars, and Far Beyond Driven had a few guitar effects that hinted towards the sounds you would get on this album. There's a variety of chorus effects, echoes, reverb, and tones that vary from song to song. There's dissonant riffing, and part of that is because some songs were tuned differently from dead center 440 Hz like most bands do. Of course, there's a bit of the Digitech whammy being used, more so on this album than Far Beyond Driven, which famously used it for Becoming. Dime was always a tone chaser, and this is the album where his guitar sounds, textures, and effects were the most diverse and weird. And then there's Floods. Among Dime's best guitar solos, most people would rank it as number 1, if not damn close to it. He did the Randy Rhoads trick of doubling the solo. It starts off slow and melodic, and then as it goes, it works its way towards chaos. The solo builds and builds until there's Dime's trademark harmonized squeals. A big reason the solo works so well is because of the chemistry between the solo and the bass line. In fact, Rex and Dime's riffing works better together on this album than before. Part of it is because the bass is more saturated, and also because Rex was able to show off his own licks and do his own thing during the solos. As for Floods, the last minute of the song acts as a calm after the storm, with Dime closing the song with a relaxing riff. Usually a band has their best vocal album, their best songwriting album, their best drum album, which in this case would be Far Beyond Driven, and dare I say that The Great Southern Trendkill is Dimebag's best overall guitar album. Floods alone would be enough for that claim to hold water, as it's been cited as being one of metal's best solos in tons of publications. So in addition to the fast songs like War Nerve and Living Through Me, there are also songs like Tens and Floods which slow things down and get weird. 25 years on Far Beyond Driven was their reaction to what the Melvins were doing. In other words, the seeds were planted on Far Beyond Driven. Trendkill is full of weird sounds, even Living Through Me has a spooky break. So musically we have the heaviest album Pantera ever did. It doesn't have the sonic brutality of Far Beyond Driven, but Far Beyond Driven's sound wouldn't have worked for some of these songs. Songs like 13 Steps to Nowhere and Tens needed the breathing space that this mix showcased. What we have is a darker and weirder album, but when it goes fast, its violence is not for the faint of heart. Far Beyond Driven walked so the Great Southern Trendkill could run. This album is for people who want a nastier Pantera and maybe don't care if they don't hear any immediate and recognizable hits. To hammer the point home, at the end of The Underground in America, Phil screams, "The trend is dead." Mission accomplished. Grind on.